start talking about one, determining if the REST API is webhooks, and then how we subscribe to it. So if you already know what webhooks are, you know how to subscribe, everything up to this point, it's probably been a little boring. If you haven't, hopefully you've got a solid foundation of at least that general idea as we're looking at it. But determining if a REST API has webhooks is going to be something that requires doing just a little bit of digging. And normally that's going to be looking through that product's documentation. Now I've got two examples I'm going to pull up. I've got both a Zendesk environment and its documentation, and then I've got a Shopify environment and documentation around it. And I'll show you an example of each and what you'd be looking at in terms of how that fits together. So if you guys have sat through, or if you've seen my I can't remember if the one that's out there is by me or someone else on our team, but I've done it a few times with our REST API and what makes a good REST API and if we can connect to it or not. That ties in very closely to this idea. Because in Smart Connect, what you're going to see is our webhook configuration where we set up and subscribe to a webhook, that falls under our REST connector. So everything that we cover in that webinar is going to apply to this in terms of, can we interact with that API? Does it have an authentication type we support? What's the payload look like? Is it JSON or XML or something else? And what are the web methods we can interact with? Same idea carries over to this in terms of, let's find the documentation, let's look to see if they have anything documented about webhooks, and then see if they have anything that actually defines what their different webhooks are and what we're able to subscribe to. So I want to show two examples on that because it's important to see how different systems document it, because there's not really a standard in terms of documentation. It's however much effort that particular application or that particular system puts into that. Additionally, there are different types of webhooks. And when I say different types, this has a couple meanings. One is the different type of events that can occur, right? Is it a webhook that fires off of both inserts or creations and updates? Do they have a different webhook for new records versus updated records? Do they have a webhook that handles delete events? Do they tie everything together into a generic one? So there's different events a webhook can fire off of. And then the other half of it is there's different, what I would call a payload. Webhooks can send a different payload. So there's different data that gets sent with the webhook to the systems that are subscribed to it. And what I mean by that is some webhooks will bundle the actual payload, the whole record that got changed, and you can pass that through. And then there's others that might send very minimal information. They might send just the keys or the GUIDs of the records that changed. And you have to go back and tie that into another API call to get the rest of that information. So, like I said, it can get fairly in-depth when you start looking at the details of it, but that's what we're trying to handle in Smart Connect to say, doesn't matter if they give you all the data, some of it, all events, just one webhook per event. We've got different setup options that will let you configure it to tie into exactly what you need.